Dear all, thank you very much for coming to this presentation. I am Andre Pekerti, and this is the rest of my team. And we just remember the late Professor Pons van de Vijver, who's been passed away for the last 3 years. Let's get started. The outline of this presentation is where I will present a rationale for the study and the program, and then present you with the findings of the program. The rationale for this program came about basically from my course where I taught cross-cultural management, and we had a discussion, and then one of the students said, sometimes acculturation is not by our choice. This came from a French Polynesian person. So I asked, what do you mean? Please elaborate, right? And basically she said, I came to study in Australia to try to get a degree, learn about Australia and make Australians friends. I tried to make friends and I failed. So now I just focus on my study. So that sort of made me sad and felt that, compelled to really try to create a program where international students had a better time or easier time making friends with Australian friends. So in terms of the theory, from a theoretical perspective, Barry basically argues that when people go abroad, they go through an acculturation process, whether it's expatriates or students. So it is a process by which individuals change, both by being influenced by contact with another culture and by being participants in general cultural changes underway in their own culture. Okay, so associated with acculturation is acculturative stress. And Searle and Ward basically suggests that these changes require both psychological and sociocultural adjustment. And this was, again, part of the reason why RAMP was designed, was to mediate these issues. So again, in terms of the theory, Lisgard suggests that culture stress or culture shock is a U-curve pattern where people start in the honeymoon phase, they're euphoric, and then they go into the culture shock phase where they face this high level and cumulative acculturative stresses, right, at about 2 months, for example. Then they master, or they adjust and master. Some people don't adjust and don't master, and they basically fail their assignment or don't do well at university, right? And the problem with this U-curve pattern is that we're basically asking international students to perform at their best when they have this acculturative stress, when they are facing all these cumulative pressures and high levels of stress. So again, that is why RAMP was created. We conducted a pilot study where we looked at using interviews and questionnaires. Was there a need for this program? And we did find that there was a need, right? In the interview of 65 students, we found that there were groups of people who had a large number of positive experiences and negative experiences. Those that had large numbers of positive experiences, we found that those positive experiences actually buffered against the negative experiences, for example. And for example, right, in the negative group, we had one student who lost the wallet and all their cards and $500 in it. A few days later, they got it back with $500 and no cards used. But they've already had this group of negative experiences and they maintained that negative outlook about the host country, right? In contrast, we also had a person from the positive group, and they've had all these positive experiences. And there was one occasion when they were literally mugged, but because they've already had these positive experiences, they argued that it could have happened in any city, for example, right? In the quantitative study, we also found basically that students who had positive contacts with host locals, for example, right, adjusted well, and they also had a better well-being. Now, that's positive, but we also found that those that had contact with their ethnic group, for example, also were helped in that adjustment process. So this pilot study suggested that it points to a need to proactively stimulate, right, international student connections with locals to create an intercultural resource, basically, in their environment. All righty. So we created this RAMP program, and it serves to facilitate adjustment to the UQ University, right, Australia, and also reciprocal learning of cultures, right? And it lasted for about 18 weeks for participants and 19 weeks for the mates. Here are the things that we did, basically. All right. So we started with a workshop, extensive workshop for the mates. And then we also, for example, right, we had purpose and content during a 6-hour workshop. You all can read the activities there. I don't have time to discuss it, but we did. We actually did have a good active session for 6 hours plus a meal, and the mates actually interacted and connected with each other. Right. And in terms of the program, we also created the program where there were some structures in terms of the activities that we want the participants and mates to do. Right. So again, we recommended weekly contacts, whatever it is, just a coffee, or through the organized fitness activities, right? And we basically suggested 3 blocks, where the first block they conducted Australian activity, second block from the participants' culture, and the third block a neutral activity. Again, we suggested a whole range of activities for the participants and also the mates to do together. So again, some pictures of some of the things they did. A mountain walk where the whole gang sort of did an activity, right? We had socials, of course. We had pizza and beer and all that stuff. And we also had a weekly fitness group that, allowed them to, again, focus on their health and well-being. And at the end, participants all receive certificates, and mates also receive a certificate of participation from the UQ Business School, signed by myself and the head of school. Okay. So what did we do? We basically created a randomized field design for students to participate in. Okay. And the treatment condition was basically mates match with international students using a purposive method. And again, this was so that we ensured that students who had restrictions on interacting with another gender, for example, were not disadvantaged. Okay, so that was the purposive design, basically. We also had a control group made up of 238 people that were not assigned to mates during the semesters. Right, in semester 1, we had 21 mates with 69 participants, and semester 2, we had 22 mates with 57 participants. All up, the total number of mates were 43, and total number of participants in the program and the project was 126. We collect the data before the program, in the middle of the program, and after the program was completed, after exams, basically. And here are some of the results. We collected a range of data, starting from self-esteem to cultural intelligence, and also a 360 evaluation, right? So the data that I'll show you over the next couple of slides basically analyzed the data from participants and also control groups, although that we're plotting the mates data at the same time, but mates were not included in the analysis, basically, right? So the graph shows here data from week 1, week 7, and week 17. All righty. So in essence, in terms of the self-esteem score, what we found were all participants had relatively high levels of self-esteem, and that maintained throughout the 17 weeks, which is good. It shows basically we had a good group of well-adjusted individuals. Now, the findings for acculturation was the most promising. In essence, what we found here basically was that in the within group data, right, the acculturation of participants who had mates increased significantly compared to the control group who did not have mates. Okay. Another interesting finding was to some degree this reflected the U-curve pattern, where there was a dip in the middle, where again they had higher levels of stress there. Okay, and between subject data basically suggested that there was a difference between week 17 score on acculturation between the participants and the control group. All right. Now we also thought that through this process, there might also be an effect where acculturation to their heritage culture or interaction with the heritage group might actually decline. And what was interesting here was there was an effect where the scores within subject, right, decrease. There was no between group effect, but in essence, it showed an assimilative effect where if people are spending effort, time, and energy to acculturate to a new culture, they might neglect their ethnic or heritage culture at the same time. Excuse me. Now, this data showed cultural intelligence. In effect, there were no effects apart from the fact that the participants' scores were lower at the beginning, but increased, but not relatively, not significantly. Okay. Data for cognitive complexity is a little complex in the sense that it is actually lower scores that show higher cognitive complexity. So cognitive complexity is the idea that when people evaluate an event, an individual, for example, they use different frames to assess different people, right? So a sample of a cognitive complexity sort of item is, think of a person you dislike and rate them on shyness and outgoingness. And then we'd ask, think of a person you like. Think of a person, who's your supervisor, for example, right? And these scores make up the cognitive complexity score. And what we found was basically for all participants, including the mates, cognitive complexity scores actually increase between the beginning and the end of the program, which again is fits the view that people do actually acculturate. But what we found, right, those that had mates actually acculturated better than those that did not have mates. All right, then we also, just to see whether the program did actually have an impact, we asked a question, a before and after effect. Right, so this is a self-report score. So they were asked, for example, how was your active listening before ramp, and how was your active listening after ramp? Right, how was your establishing a relationship based on trust before ramp and after ramp, for example. So what we found was, again, significant effect between the before scores and the after scores for both participants and mates, which is promising, right? In the sense that both groups of people learned about skills, life skills throughout the program. Those participants learned it from mates and again through activities, and mates also learned it from the participants themselves, which is great, right? So although this is a self-assessment, we also wanted to make sure whether it actually did take place, right? So we did a 360 where the mates actually evaluated the participants in week 1, 7, and 17, right? And what we saw was basically increasing pattern of these skills developing throughout the 17 weeks, okay? What we saw in semester 1, and we also saw this effect in semester 2. Yes, semester 2 participants basically had higher level scores in terms of the baseline, but the pattern was basically the same, where participants improved their life skills, and the data was an observed data from the from the mates. Yeah, there were a number of limitations in terms of the program. One is really that the program is only beneficial if the mates and participants connect and they're active. The bigger budget would have been nice. It would have allowed the sample size and also the number of activities. And there were limitations of data. I think the sample size of 126 participants is relatively small, but it is larger than any extant published studies on mentoring at the moment. And again, I think that's beneficial for the study. At the same time, we had self-report data, but also we supported that self-report data with 360 report data. So I think that the self-report data were corroborated by the 360 data, which is positive again. Alrighty, some impacts. I think there was a positive impact from the program. Since the program started, I've had students contact me to be referred to a health professional. And this is huge in the sense that I think there's a stigma associated with mental health, and it's wonderful that they're willing to ask for help, right? Again, another impact was this program was implemented in the school, and then morphed into a wild program called the Bell Buddies, and the people that implemented it in the school using an electronic platform got an award for that, which is a bonus. All right, so some impact for participants, right? Again, you could read the sort of comments in terms of how they got something out of the program. I don't feel lonely anymore when I go through the stress from life or study, right? I really appreciate this unique program, which provides us with a platform to meet new friends in Australia. But it also impacted the mates. This first quote is actually the best one, right? It says, I actually learned a lot, and although I did not tell them, it dispelled a couple of wrongly preconceived notions I had about Chinese people. What was interesting about this mate was he was an ethnically Chinese individual who was born in Australia. So there was that reciprocal learning of cultures, which is great, okay? I'm running out of time, so thank you for participating or listening to my participation. I'd appreciate questions or comments. Thank you.